Hello, everyone. This is Presley Lovelace, and today I'm presenting ideas from Secular Surge, a book by David Campbell, Jeffrey Lehman, and John Green. It explores a major shift in American society, the rising number of people who are not religious, often called the nones. But this book argues that the shift isn't just about private belief, it's becoming a major force in politics. The authors call this growing trend the secular surge. Let's explore what it means, how it affects politics, and what it might mean for our future. Secularization theory argues that as societies modernize, religious influence declines, especially in public life. However, secular surge revives secularization theory in the political context. Secularism is now an organized force shaping party coalitions and civic engagement. This suggests that while religion persists, its dominance is no longer assumed, especially among younger, educated, and politically active populations. When you hear the word secular, you might just think of atheism or people who do not go to church. But the authors of Secular Surge want us to think broader than that. They define secularism in 3 ways. Cognitive secularism is when people no longer rely on religion to answer life's big questions. An example of cognitive secularism is a person who believes that morality can be derived from philosophy or ethics rather than scripture. Cultural secularism is when people reject religious authority in politics or public life. An example of cultural secularism is opposing government-led prayer in public schools. Institutional secularism is when people don't participate in religious institutions, such as churches or synagogues. An example of institutional secularism is someone who was raised Christian but no longer attends church or identifies with any denomination. Together, these create a new growing identity in America, the secular American. According to surveys cited in the book, nearly 1/3 of Americans now say that they have no religious affiliation. That's up dramatically from just a few decades ago. These are the nones, a term that comes from the way that they answer the religion question on surveys. None of the above. But what's crucial is this. Many of these nones aren't just indifferent. They are actively secular. They believe that religion should just stay out of politics. They're skeptical of religious authority, and they're beginning to organize politically. For a long time, religion shaped political identity. Now, secularism is doing the same. Why? The authors argue that the secular surge is creating a new political fault line in America. For decades, we've talked about the culture wars: abortion, same-sex marriage, school prayer. Those battles have largely been framed as religion versus secularism. But here's the twist. For most of that time, secular people weren't very politically engaged. Religious conservatives, like the religious right, were well organized. They had institutions, leaders, churches, and a clear political agenda. Secular people, by contrast, were more scattered. They didn't have organizations or PACs. They didn't vote as a bloc. Frankly, they weren't really on the political map. That is all starting to change. Campbell, Lehman, and Green show that secular Americans are becoming more politically active. They're voting, donating, protesting, and running for office. And when they do, they lean heavily Democratic, especially on issues like abortion rights, LGBTQ+ rights, climate change, and the separation of church and state. So, here's the key point. Just as white evangelical Christians have become the backbone of the Republican Party, secular Americans are becoming a core constituency of the Democratic Party. This is creating a new kind of polarization, one that's not just about economics or race, but about religion versus secularism, a political divide over the role of religion itself. One of the biggest forces behind the secular surge is generational change. Millennials and Gen Z are the most secular cohorts in American history. Over 40% of them report no religious affiliation, and unlike older generations, they're unlikely to return to religion as they age. Why? The authors suggest several reasons. First, they've grown up in pluralistic environments exposed to many beliefs, lifestyles, and cultures, often online. Second, they've come of age during times of institutional distrust, including towards churches rocked by scandals and political alliances. Third, science and digital media shape much of their worldview, giving them tools outside of religion to explain the world and find meaning. What's especially striking is that for many young Americans, secularism isn't a rejection, it's just the default. This generational shift isn't a blip, it's a trend line. And as these groups grow in political power, they're bringing their secular values with them. So, what does this mean for our democracy? There are a few possibilities, and some of them are hopeful, while others are more concerning. On one hand, the political rise of secular Americans could rebalance the debate. For a long time, religious conservatives had an outsized influence on policy, particularly on moral issues. A stronger secular voice could bring more pluralism, more representation for non-religious people, and a renewed focus on the church-state separation. But, on the other hand, there are risks. First, it could deepen our polarization. When political identity becomes tied to religious identity or lack thereof, compromise becomes harder. Politics becomes more about who we are rather than what we believe. And when one party is seen as the religious party and the other as the godless party, that's not healthy for democracy. Second, it could increase distrust. Religious Americans may feel like their values are under attack. Secular Americans may feel like their rights are being ignored. The authors warn about a growing culture war 2.0, not over specific policies, but over who gets to shape American public life. And finally, there's a big question about representation. Despite their numbers, secular Americans are still underrepresented in government. There are very few openly secular elected officials. So even though the secular surge is real, it hasn't fully translated into power. Yet. As secular Americans grow in number and visibility, the book also highlights something just as important, the religious counter-movement that has emerged in response. Particularly among conservative Christians, secularism is often framed as a threat to moral order, traditional values, and even national identity. This response isn't just emotional, it's deeply political. We see it in the rise of Christian nationalism, court cases about religious liberty, and policies aimed at reinforcing religious norms in public life. The authors describe this as a kind of reactive politicization, where the growing secular presence pushes religious conservatives to double down on their beliefs, organize politically, and support candidates who promise to restore religion to public life. This dynamic, secularism rising, religion reacting, is one reason why polarization in America is now about worldviews, not just policies. So understanding the secular surge also means understanding the religious response to it and how both forces are shaping our politics in deeply personal, moral, and identity-driven ways. Secular surge doesn't claim that religion is dying. Far from it. Religion is still powerful in many parts of American life. But what the authors are saying, and showing with data, is that we are entering a new era, an era where secularism is no longer silent. It's visible, it's active, and it's political. The biggest takeaway from the book is this. The divide between the religious and the secular is now one of the most important divides in American politics. It cuts across parties, policies, and public opinion. And we can't understand our political landscape without understanding it. So, whether you consider yourself religious, secular, or somewhere in between, the challenge for all of us is to think seriously about how to live together, how to debate, vote, and govern in a country where worldviews are diverging. Because, ultimately, democracy depends on our ability to disagree without division, to hold competing beliefs while still sharing a common civic space. The big message here is that secularism is no longer silent. Just as religious conservatives organized in the 1980s and 90s, secular Americans are becoming a political force. The challenge, and the opportunity, is figuring out how we live together with competing worldviews. Can we maintain a democracy that respects both belief and non-belief? As the authors say, democracy requires disagreement without division. Thank you.